The Ukrainian war on the territory of Eastern Europe continues in the eastern and southern directions. The eastern front line is held by the fortress city of Bakhmut in the southern front line. The goal is to achieve success on the Crimean route. The Kiev leader's goal is shaping the Ukrainian war, as Zelensky often emphasizes. The war started with Crimea and will end with Crimea. The Ukrainian armed forces continues its efforts on the route targeted by its leaders. Ukrainian troops are achieving significant success in the key area holding the southern front line. Let's take a closer look at what's happening on the southern front line. Speculation about Ukraine's long-awaited spring offensive continues to rise. The developments that triggered these speculations took place in the Dnipro River the other day. Images from Russian military bloggers provided the first reliable geolocated image of Ukrainian positions south of the river. According to conflict analysts, Ukrainian troops managed to cross the Dnipro River in the south of the country for the first time since the beginning of the Russian invasion. Crossing the Dnipro is crucial to the Ukrainian military's goal of controlling Crimea, which Moscow annexed 9 years ago. Ukrainian troops aim to advance about 161 kilometers south of the river, at least as far as the annexed Crimea. This breakthrough comes just after rumors of a partial withdrawal in Russia's Kherson region. As is known, the Dnipro River has been the front line since the Russian troops withdrew from Kherson in November. In addition, according to experts at the Institute for War Studies in the United States, the scope and purpose of these Ukrainian positions, Ukraine's ability and willingness to maintain permanent positions in this area remain unclear. The Russian-appointed governor of the Kherson region denied reports that Ukrainian forces were positioned on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River. The governor stressed that the region is completely controlled by the Russian army. The governor of Kherson, however, acknowledges that sabotage groups may land, but the governor insists that the sabotage groups will eventually be destroyed by Russian fighters or thrown back into the water. Former Kherson Mayor Vladimir Saldo stated in a Telegram update that Russian forces have full control over the area. Vladimir Saldo has suggested that the images referenced by the ICW may be of Ukrainian sabotage units who managed to take a selfie along the Dnipro before being pushed back. Natalia Humeniuk, spokesperson for Ukraine's Southern Operational Command, asked for patience in response to reports in the Ukrainian media that the establishment of certain positions marked the beginning of a counterattack. Natalia Humeniuk did not confirm or deny the ICW report. Humeniuk stated that the details of military operations in the Dnipro Delta cannot be disclosed for operational and security reasons. Humeniuk also mentioned on Ukrainian television that crossing a wide and powerful river like the Dnipro while crossing the front line is a very difficult task. On the other hand, according to the reports of the Institute of War Studies, Ukrainian forces established positions near the town of Oleshky across the Dnipro Delta from Kherson. According to the report, Ukrainian forces are advancing towards the nearby village of Dapchi. Is also claimed that Ukrainian troops held these positions for several weeks and secured supply lines. This claim also shows that there is no Russian control in the region. However, Russian military figures are reportedly considering consolidating their current gains in Ukraine rather than launching new operations due to material and manpower constraints. These days are very active on the southern front line of Ukraine. Ukrainians who are trying to advance to Crimea by crossing the Dnipro River are also taking precautions in attacks against Crimea. The armed forces of Ukraine deployed a long-range missile system Grom-2 in Zaporizhia for attacks on Crimea. The Grom-2 missile system has a range of up to 300 kilometers, which allows the Ukrainian army to attack the territory of Crimea. Vladimir Rogov, head of the Zaporizhia movement We Are With Russia, announced that the Grom-2 long-range operational tactical missile system was transferred by Ukrainian troops to the city of Zaporizhia under the control of Kiev. RIA Novosti reported that, according to Rogov, this missile system could be used for attacks in Crimea. Rogov argues that these actions confirm the need to push the Ukrainian troops as far as possible from the Zaporizhia region, and the line of contact should be moved deeper into Ukraine. Earlier, Vladimir Rogov also reported that Ukrainian troops accumulated military equipment in metallurgical factories and granaries in the Orakhovsky and Pokrovsky districts of the Zaporizhia region under the control of Ukrainian forces. The successes of Ukraine on the southern front line greatly alarmed the Russian troops. The Russians, who could not prevent the Ukrainian forces in the Dnipro River, have difficulty in resisting the Kiev troops on the eastern front line. Now let's turn our route to what happened in the fortress city of Bakhmut. President Vladimir Zelensky promised to fight in the besieged city of Bakhmut despite the approach of Russian forces from three sides. Zelensky said it is impossible for us to give up Bakhmut because it will widen the front and give the Russian forces and Wagner a chance to capture more of our country. Kiev troops are fighting both Russian soldiers and the Wagner paramilitary group in Bakhmut. The ghost town of Bakhmut offers the Russian vistas from hell. The Russian army has lost thousands of men in Bakhmut in recent weeks. For every kilometer of land captured around the city of Bakhmut, hundreds of Russian soldiers were eliminated. Russia's Wagner mercenary group led most of the Bakhmut conflict. The Wagner group also took a lot of losses in these conflicts. In fact, the majority of the soldiers lost in Bakhmut were mercenary groups. The prolongation of the war continues to negatively affect the Russian army. Russian troops experiencing a lack of equipment and psychological collapse are having a hard time holding on to the front lines. Vladimir Putin's frivolous Bakhmut insistence puts his army in trouble. Russia is almost melting in this small city, which has now become a symbolic conflict between the two countries. But the Institute for War Studies has revealed that Russian forces are focused on capturing Bakhmut as soon as possible before launching Ukraine's much-anticipated counteroffensive. Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin said Bakhmut handed over his north and southwestern flanks to the Russian Ministry of Defense. Meanwhile, the Russian Air Force supports Wagner's main effort in the city, which has been fought over for months. According to the War Studies Institute forecast, this air support appears to allow Wagner to make further gains and push the Ukrainian forces towards a withdrawal from Bakhmut. The collaboration between Wagner and VDV shows that the Russian military leadership, which Prigozhin had previously criticized, demonstrates Moscow's desire to hasten the capture of Bakhmut. The think tank said that the pattern of commitment around the city shows that the Russian military leadership increasingly prioritizes completing the capture of the city before the start of the counteroffensive. Vladimir Putin is determined to seize Bakhmut no matter what. Even if Putin's troops succeed in capturing Bakhmut, it will not be considered a win. The capture of this city, which cost the lives of thousands of soldiers, will be nothing more than a symbol of Putin's failure. In addition, the meltdown of the Russian army on other front lines, including Bakhmut, puts Putin in a lot of trouble. Putin is launching new campaigns to compensate for soldier losses to recruit more soldiers. The Russian Ministry of Defense has launched a massive new recruiting campaign for volunteers. The goal of the campaign is to attract 400,000 volunteers. Ads across the country target the masculine pride and financial needs of young Russians to attract volunteers to the Russian armed forces. We will see how effective Putin's new campaign will be in the coming days. As a result, the successes on the southern front, including in Kherson, make Ukraine more determined about the Crimea. The Kiev leader repeats at every opportunity that the war will end with the liberation of Crimea. The Kherson and Dnipro rivers will always be in the foreground in the Ukrainian war. A success here will play a role in bringing the Kiev leader to his dream of Crimea. Will this rise, which started with the blowing up of the bridges in Dnipro last year, end when the southern front line is completely cleared of Russian soldiers? In an attempt to breach Ukrainian defenses north of Avdiivka, Russians tried to conduct a new attack and put Ukrainians in over Bakhmut into a pocket. They prepared a huge assault unit consisting of tanks and armored vehicles, got to their positions. But right when they were ready to launch their assault, they suffered a devastating flank attack and got completely demolished. Last time I told you that the Russians decided to shift their focus to the area of lower tactical value because Ukrainians seemed to be protecting high-value positions too tightly. I also told you that despite the initial success, Russians were quickly pushed back towards the highway. After several unsuccessful attempts to recapture these positions, Russians realized that breaking through the same Ukrainian defenses would not be as easy because now Ukrainians are fully focused on this area. That is why Russians decided to capitalize on the recent advancements around Nova Bakhmut to develop their success further and attack Krasnohorivka from the north. If you look at the topographic map, we can see that by attacking from this direction, they would be essentially fighting at the same elevation as opposed to trying to storm the hills from the lowlands. But if Russians were to carry out this attack right now, they would be shot in the back because the Ukrainians are controlling the western part of Nova Bakhmut and the tree belts around it. Ukrainians in the three belts are holding a perfect position for countering this type of attack. That is why in order to continue encircling Avdiivka, Russians needed to establish control over the last 30% of the village. Based on the available footage from February, it is clear that Russians control the hill between Novoselivka and Nova Bakhmut. The next logical step would be to engulf Ukrainians by attacking them from the north. And this is exactly what Russians attempted to do. They prepared a large assault unit consisting of 5 tanks and 10 armored vehicles. They rapidly moved along this huge tree line and tried to assault Ukrainian positions from the flank. Unfortunately for Russians, it looks like they took no measures to secure their own flanks. As you can see, Ukrainians are controlling the hills around Alexandropol. The positions on these hills give a direct view of everything that is happening on this side of Nova Bakhmut. Geolocated footage confirmed that Ukrainians spotted a Russian assault unit during the relocation process. Ukrainians responded extremely quickly and attacked Russian assault unit before they got ready for their assault. The video shows that Ukrainians opened intense artillery fire. Russians tried to save their infantry by creating a line with their armor in front of the tree area, but it did not help much. The armor got quickly destroyed and the Ukrainian infantry entered the region. Russians reportedly lost 3 tanks, 5 armored vehicles, dozens killed, and half a dozen were taken captive. Overall, Russians made a big mistake by counting too much on the fork. Judging by the video, the fog inhibited visual control over the area, but the fog was not too dense, leaving their flanks extremely vulnerable. The risk did not pay official. The moving column was quickly spotted by the drone, and Russian assault unit was almost entirely destroyed. Russia is experiencing a great fear these days. Putin's fear has emerged and it has caused the Russian people to panic. It has claimed that things are out of control in the Kremlin palace. This event, which has stirred Russia, also gives important clues about how the war will proceed. The historic resistance of the Ukrainian army has disrupted all of Russia's plans. The Kremlin administration never expected this war to spread to Russian territory. However, bombs have been exploding one after another in Russia lately. Russia's air defense system cannot prevent these explosions in the city of Belgorod on the Russian border with Ukraine. Explosions are taking place one after the other. As a result of these explosions, the Russian army suffers a lot of damage. The Russian army trains its soldiers in training camps in Belgorod. These soldiers trained in this camp are then sent to Ukraine to fight. Russia chose Belgorod for this training because it is very close to Ukraine. But there was one thing the Kremlin leadership did not anticipate. The Ukrainian army successfully repelled the Russian invasion as a result of the change in the maps. The Russian base in Belgorod came within the range of Ukrainian missiles. As a result of operations from this area, the Ukrainian army bombed many Russian targets in Belgorod. Russia suffered heavy losses in these attacks, but Putin has a much bigger fear. The possibility of the Ukrainian army launching an air operation against Moscow is causing panic in the Kremlin. Russian citizens who left their homes in Moscow yesterday morning found something interesting. There was something new on top of many of Moscow's tall buildings. The Kremlin administration has placed Pantsir 1 air defense systems on top of the buildings. Muscovites who took photos of the systems and uploaded them to social media experienced a great panic because the installation of these systems indicated that the possibility of an attack in Moscow was very high. Moreover, the success of the air defense systems is constantly debated by the Russian public. Russia also tried to use air defense systems in the regions it occupied in Ukraine. However, these systems were very unsuccessful. The drones used by the Ukrainian army could not be destroyed by Russia's air defense system, so the Russian army suffered a very heavy defeat on the battlefield. That's why the Russian people do not trust the air defense systems in Moscow. Russian citizens are in great fear. Russian citizens blame Putin for this incident. They think that Putin has failed to ensure Russia's security. It is causing a huge damage to Putin's reputation as the security concerns of the Russian people grow. So does the anger against Putin. Putin is failing to allay the concerns of the Russian people. On the other hand, since the beginning of the war, about 120,000 soldiers have died in the Russian army. The number of wounded soldiers is unknown. These huge losses are also affecting the Russian people. Russian citizens think that this war must end so that no more people die. Seeing the air defense systems in Moscow, citizens began to think that many more people would die soon. So why did Putin install air defense systems in Moscow? Could the Ukrainian army really be planning an air operation against Moscow? The Ukrainian military currently does not have enough missiles to bomb Moscow. There is a great distance of about 600 kilometers between Ukraine's northernmost border and Moscow. This is too far for Ukrainian missiles, but Ukraine has a much more effective piece of equipment for its air operations. Drones. Bayraktar drones at the hands of the Ukrainian army can fly up to very long distances and drop bombs. Bayraktar drones produced in Turkey have become Russia's nightmare. Previously, some explosions in Russia were allegedly caused by Ukrainian drones. The successive explosions at the Engels military airport in the Sarado region of Russia and the Yagi-level military airport in Ryazan surprised the whole world. The Russian press claimed that these explosions were the result of attacks by drones belonging to the Ukrainian army. Later, the official authorities also shared these claims. A fuel tanker exploded near the airport in Russia's Kursk region. After the explosion, Kursk region Governor Roman Starovoytov said that on a social media, an oil-filled tanker at Kursk airport caught fire due to a drone attack. There was no loss of life. The fire was intervened. All special services are working at the scene. It is feared that Ukraine will use drones to carry out operations in Moscow. If a drone operation is carried out against important organizations in the city, Russia's reputation will be completely ruined. It is especially important for Russia to ensure the security of state buildings, institutions such as the General Staff and the Ministry of Defense. But Ukrainian drones have the technical power to hit these areas. But it is not only the drones of the Ukrainian army that scares Putin. Putin has a much bigger fear. Since the very beginning of this war, Putin has been making very harsh statements addressed to Western countries. As a result, tensions between NATO and Russia have risen rapidly. But Putin's threats of nuclear weapons have increased the tension between the two sides even more. Many experts have shared predictions about what Western countries would do if Putin decided to use nuclear weapons. There was one thing that all experts agreed on. According to experts, if Putin decides to use nuclear weapons, NATO members will know about it, because in this process, tensions will increase more. In addition, many intelligence agencies, especially the CIA, are gathering information about Russia's nuclear activities. If Putin decides to use nuclear weapons, intelligence agencies could learn about this decision. NATO could intervene in the Kremlin to protect the world's security and prevent a nuclear war. This situation scares Putin very much because if the NATO army intervenes in Moscow, Russia will suffer the biggest defeat in its history. Some experts emphasize that the use of nuclear weapons is not the only condition for NATO to intervene. According to NATO's founding treaty, if a NATO member country is attacked, all NATO members had the right to respond. This means that if Putin attacks a NATO member, there could be a military operation in Moscow to prevent such operations. Putin is planning to strengthen Moscow's air defense system by invading Ukraine. President Putin has put his country in grave danger. The fear in the Kremlin is growing every day. What do you think about the air defense systems deployed in Moscow? Do you think the Ukrainian army could launch an air operation against Moscow? Do you think Putin took the measures in Moscow against NATO? What do you think about the impact of this war on Russian politics?